Hi everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of The Cauldron. And today we've got a star with us, a star that's with us normally every time we do a Cauldron, but she's become a star because she is actually standing for election to the Angus Council. So Lisa, can you tell us a bit about your why? What was your motivation to do this?
I think my main motivation was the women's policy in Alba. I like the women's declaration. I like how Alba cares about women. I like how Alba doesn't submit to the new ideology. I really do like that. And another big thing for me was the poverty. I grew up in rough times, and for me, I want to give back. I want to make changes, and I want to give other children and families hope, because I had in later life role models that gave me hope, and I want to be there. So yeah, I had better role models in later life as I grew up, and I want to give back. I want to not necessarily be a role model. I don't need gratification for what I want to do, but I want to give other families and other children hope. And I think as a counsellor, I could do that. And, you know, I'm all or nothing. So if I'm a counsellor, I'm going to give it my all. I'm going to give these families my all. And I'm really going to look out for the needs of the women, for the children, and obviously put independence on the table.
And what ward is it you're standing in, Lisa?
Arbroath West, Letham and Freakham.
Right. So it's Angus Council.
Yeah, Angus Council.
So if you want to protect women's and children's rights, if you want to fight poverty, and if you want to put independence on the table, Lisa's your candidate if you live in that ward. So Claire, what's been, I could go for something like annoying you this week?
Well, there was one story in particular, and I thought it was quite interesting. It was Dr. David McCareth. Now, he was sacked, I think in 2018. He's actually a disability assessor with DWP. And he basically is a religious man, he's a Christian man, and he doesn't believe that he should be referring to a 6-foot bearded man as a woman, and he was sacked for that. Okay, so he took DWP to a tribunal and he lost that, and now I believe he's going to the High Court. Now, if we apply the same logic to the Maya Forstater ruling, you know, this man is not. He's not being derogatory. It's just it's his belief, his religious belief, that men are men, women are women, and we can't change sex. He believes that sex is immutable, and I think it's fair enough. Why on earth is a doctor? Well, I think he had like 30 years service. Why is he being sacked? Because, you know, it's like saying religious beliefs don't matter, women's rights don't matter. Nothing matters apart from trans rights. Now, you know, this is, you can't compel people to believe. It's like a religion. You know, there's no basis in fact for this feeling that you're a woman. There's no facts. There's nothing there of any substance, and I think it's really unfair to sack people and cause this much stress and alarm to all sections of society if they're not adhering to, you know, what the government are telling us we have to agree with. Because, you know, today it's trans rights. What's it tomorrow? So that's annoyed me this week.
Well, I think for me this week, or this last few weeks, we've had some good news from the Equality and Human Rights Commission, who have came out against the Scottish government and said that they believe that, you know, women's rights are impacted by their plans. And also they have also came out against the bill on conversion therapy, thinking that that needs more thought. So they've come in for a tirade of abuse and all sorts of like stupidity, because the Equality and Human Rights Commission is to oversee the working of the Equality Act. So you can't opt out of this. So there's all these, you know, trans ideology bodies that want to opt out of this, and they can't, because it's the Equality Act is law. So this has been kind of good news for us, because it's against what the government has been saying, because the government has been saying that it doesn't impact women's rights, and clearly it does, because the original ruling at the European Court was that it was such a small number of people that have gender dysphoria and change their bodies that it was, on balance, women could, suck it up, basically. But because now it's so many more people, it's been expanded. That original ruling doesn't really hold anymore, because with self-ID, anybody can say that they're a woman and gain access to women's services and spaces. So that was a good thing against the Scottish government. And there was another interesting article as well, which was about this army of women, which I'm sure we are soldiers in that army of women, that have been assembled to fight this bill, to fight Nicola Sturgeon's self-ID bill. And so, yes, that's us. So it was in the Telegraph, because I remember reading it and being really amazed that it's like one of the few articles that I've read that was like every word was accurate. It was a very, very accurate article. So like, we're not bots. We are real women who have these concerns, and we are organising to defeat this bill in any way we can. So that was another interesting. Then the other interesting article, which was in the Times, and it was saying that the government are thinking of backtracking on some of the provisions in the Gender Recognition Act reform bill. And the thing about this is this is a con. The government have deliberately put two things into that bill that they are willing to give up. And it's so that, because governments do this all the time, it's a controversial bill, so they know they're going to get a fight. So what they want to do is they want to be able to present it that they've been reasonable, they've made compromises. So what they've done is they put a couple of things in the bill that don't change the actual problem of the bill. The problem with the bill is there's no gatekeeping. So you need a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. But they have put in the age of 16 to get a GRC, which they will lose. They'll be, make a big song and dance of it and say, okay, we'll make it 18, we've been reasonable. And they've had 3 months living as your new gender, whereas they'll say, okay, we'll do 6 months because we will be reasonable. So they've got these two things that they're going to drop in order to appear reasonable, but it doesn't change the problem with the bill. The bill is the fact that there's no medical gatekeeping. So, yeah, Claire, what do you think?
It was just what you were saying earlier about there not being an impact on women. The government are trying to con us into believing there's no impact on women. And they've got such form on this, because when men were introduced into the women's female prison estate, there was an impact assessment done. I think it was the Scottish Trans Alliance, the guy that's in there. He did an impact assessment saying there would be no impact on women. Of course there would be, and there was. The schools guidance that was introduced into schools, there was no impact assessment done, which was unlawful to begin with. And that's clearly having an effect on women, well, on girls, on children. And, I don't understand how they can possibly imagine there's no impact, because we all know there is, and there is.
Yeah.
So, sorry, I just thought about that when you said that.
Yeah, I know. It's a bit of a red rag, because, every time like Nicola Sturgeon stands up and says, this has no impact on women's rights, or in Shona Robinson, there is. And they just say this, they don't address any of your concerns. No. They just say it has no impact. You're not valid. Your complaints aren't valid. You're just transphobic bigots. They don't address the concerns.
I know. And why is Nicola Sturgeon so invested in this ideology? I do not understand it. She's a woman herself. She says she's a feminist. I cannot see what benefit there is to her in ignoring women like this. It's an absolute disgrace. She is a disgrace, and there must be some reason behind this. No woman would behave like this if there was not some other reason.
Yeah, it would be a political reason. I would say it's because her power base within the SNP have been built off these young men and women, but young men that are part of her power base. And I imagine that she's trying to appease them, and she's trying to appease the ideologues within her party. And Patrick Harvey is very much captured by the whole queer theory. So I think there's a little bit that she's in too deep to get out, and she's not a person with imagination. She can never adapt, she can never change. She's determined to push it through, because now it's become a matter of her authority. You know, like if she doesn't get it through, then she's weakened her authority. So I think it's probably a lot of political reasons that she's clinging to this. She started off down the path and she can't leave the path.
It's very disappointing to see this, though, especially in a woman. You know, women are known for their empathy. You know, generation after generation of women, we're the ones that, you know, have empathy, a lot of empathy usually. I just don't see any. And, you know, these women who are basically supporting a man's rights movement, you know, that doing such damage, I don't understand it.
What do you think, Lisa?
Personally, my experience showed me that it was women that went after me. It was women that wanted to give up their rights, and it's been men that have supported me more than a lot of women. Obviously, I've got a lot of women supporters now, but before I came onto Twitter and all of this, it was women that went after me at university. It wasn't men.
There's a group of women, isn't there, who have been sold this idea that equality means being equal on every playing field, and that includes sport, where it's very clear that women are not equal to men just because physically we are smaller. Obviously in workplace, etc., that's definitely, yes, a level playing field there, but in other places it really does matter. But these girls, these women, have been sold the idea that in order to be equal, we have to face them in sports, we have to do the MMA stuff. You know, I don't know if I know you've watched it, Lisa. It's very distressing to see it. You know, it's like a grown man beating a woman up. And, you know, I watched it and I listened to the commentary from the person videoing, and it was a woman, and they were laughing, saying, oh God, she asked for this and she's getting what she deserves, sort of thing. And I just see it as abuse. It's just abuse, that they're actually imagining for a minute that is a fair competition. It's not fair at all. It's horrific.
There's a certain group, like, you know, the mean girls. So there's a certain group that want to be in the in crowd and to curry favour. And quite often it's currying favour with men. And so that, I think, is a group dynamic. Not being a psychologist, I can't explain it any better, but I have experienced it quite a lot in my life. So I know what it is. I try not to be one of the people in the group is being nasty, and I hope I manage not to be that person most of the time. But you do see that group dynamic quite a lot. The point about men is very important, because in the polling, and I've mentioned this before, and I just want to reiterate it, men are more against self-ID than women. So therefore, we really should be reaching out to men and getting them to help us in our campaigns and not pushing them away, because they're so on our side. So I think that that's like quite important to engage men in this, because it's mainly been women on our own, having our groups, having our networking groups. But if you even look at social media and you look at somebody like Ian Lawson and Barhead Boy, they have been talking about this issue for a long time. And there's also Tweet Street Peter on again. So these are all men that have been truly fighting against this ideology and for women and children for a long time. The difference for them is they don't really get the abuse we get. because, and it's the oddest thing online that if a woman says something online, identifiable as a woman, like, you know, using your name, and a man says something very similar, it's the woman that gets the abuse, not the man. And I've seen that happen to me quite often. So the men aren't getting the abuse, but they are certainly standing up for us. And it's not like they're getting no abuse, they're getting a bit, but not comparable to us.
I know when Posey Parker was on GMB News, was it James Max, the guy's name? You know, he just was trying to dismiss her, really. And I mean, he looked like an idiot, obviously, but then he had a man on who basically said the same thing, and he was totally agreeable and totally, you know, charming. And yet Posey Parker, his disdain was so palpable. You see it. They don't like a powerful woman, and he didn't like Posey Parker.
Yeah, there is a certain type of younger man, I think, and it's just basically misogyny. I think from every generation of men, there is a certain streak of misogyny in it, and they enjoy it because they don't like women, and this is a good way to get at them. But that's definitely not all men. It's the same with them, you know, like every other statistic. There is a group of men that will turn on women and be very vicious because they're basically misogynists, and this is a good thing to use, you know, a good outlet for their misogyny.
The very sad thing for me when I see women supporting this so strongly, it's just they don't realise really what they're doing and what they're doing for future generations, you know, young girls coming up. Because where's this all going to end? You know, we're going to end up with full women transgender teams in sport. You know, is it just going to be unisex prisons where anything goes? You know, these protections in law, they're there for a reason, and this ideology is basically trying to circumvent the law. And the government is actually going across the world. Governments are going along with this, and I think we really need to get this message out to women to understand fully what it is they're actually supporting and the implications for the future generations of accepting this. You know, we shouldn't be accepting it, absolutely not.
So unfortunately, it looks like the Scottish Government is going to bring in this bill, but it seems that they have got a little plan to delay it till after the council elections, because it was meant to be this week, and now it's being delayed. Now, I would imagine that the reason it's being delayed till after the council elections is so that they can say, so if the SNP and the Greens do not lose seats at the council elections, then they will be able to say that Scotland agrees with them on gender, on self-ID. Because if they win, then I think nothing will stop them putting that bill through. Nothing will stop them. But if they get a shock, if they get a wake-up call at the council elections, then what will happen is the next people that are up for election are the MPs. Now, the MPs do not want to lose their nice salaries and seats at Westminster, and therefore they will put pressure on Nicola Sturgeon over this GRA because they'll be worried they'll affect them. So our best first strategy ought to be to make sure that we get gender critical candidates elected like Lisa. Although interestingly for Labour and Lib Dems, their voters really don't agree with them, and the Lib Dem voters really are against self-ID. So I'd watch myself as a Lib Dem, and if anybody is standing in an area, there's a Lib Dem area for council, just make sure every voter in that area knows about self-ID, because the Lib Dems hate it. They absolutely hate it. They hate it actually just slightly more than Tories do. So that's my advice for anybody standing in a Lib Dem council ward. You know what to do.
I think as well, within the Lib Dems, there is a pushback, because I'm sure I got invited to something. I must look it up. There are groups within the Lib Dems now organising to fight against it, which is really good to see.
And if you actually highlight this at the council election and do damage to the Lib Dems in the council election because of it, it actually strengthens the hands of these groups. Same with Labour Women's Declaration. they're trying to fight back in Labour, which, you know, to be absolutely honest, is probably as much of the lost cause as trying to fight back into the SNP, considering how Keir Starmer is. But it does, if they lose, if it's an issue and they start losing votes because of the issue, then it strengthens the groups that are pushing back within the parties. So that's you know, that's another good reason. So I think that would be our hope. Our hope would be that if we make it an issue, if we get enough gender critical candidates, and that's from every party, it's not just saying vote Alba, though obviously I like you to vote Alba, but of any party elected, and then that will put a lot of pressure on Nicola Sturgeon. Nicola Sturgeon's getting away with everything at the moment because she's high in the polls, she's had electoral success, and unfortunately for politicians, that's what really matters, because it's their jobs. So not their principles, their jobs. So that's one thing. And then the other thing, of course, is with the people elected in the council chamber, even if they just go ahead with it, if they dig their heels in, Nicola Sturgeon doesn't listen to her MPs, doesn't care, and carries on with it, it means that there'll be enough people in the council chambers to prevent bad things happening, because most people are against this. So a lot of councillors in the SNP, in Labour, in Lib Dems or Tories or whatever, they're doing it. Well, they're doing it because their party's telling them to. They don't believe in it. They don't believe that it's a good thing. They know it's dangerous. They're closer to the people, you know, locally, so they know it's dangerous to women and children. But so if there's gender critical councillors there, and a lot of councils, you know, they rely on a little bit on deals, the gender critical councillors might find they're pushing an open door to say, well, we're always going to have girls only toilets, girls only changing rooms, girls only sports, and, you know, women's services that exclude men and so on, because whatever they do in Holyrood, the councils can use the Equality Act exceptions, because that's reserved to Westminster. So there's kind of two strategies here. One is the political strategy of putting the fear into the SNP MPs, and the other is the strategy of using the gender critical councillors to protect the single sex services and spaces post-May.
Can I ask though, when you're saying that they'll use the Equality Act to protect women's spaces, what about a man that has a GRA that says he's a woman?
It still counts. Now, it's actually one of the things that's quite difficult because there's a lot of questions around it, but you can legally exclude a male with a GRC, gender recognition system. Yeah, you can legally exclude them from women's services under the Equality Act.
Their birth certificate, everything.
I know, it's bizarre, but you can. So I know that when you like practically, how can you do that? Because there's all these different rules, which we need to go into about the GRA situation, because, you know, change the birth certificate, you're not allowed to ask anybody they have a GRC, and so on and so on. So you look at that and you say, well, how can that match up with the rules in the Equality Act, which clearly states that you can exclude males with GRCs from women-only services? So they don't match, but you can. So what I'm saying is the council can use the Equalities Act to exclude any biological males from women's spaces and services.
Can any person use that to, you know, say you went somewhere and there was a man in there, could you challenge them on that?
Mm-hmm. I think the problem is, I think the problem is, again, the way that the laws in the Scottish government is bringing in or has enacted, and the laws that the Westminster government have. Because of course there's this feeling like if you challenge them, you might be called a transphobe, or you might get done for hate crimes and so on. But you can challenge them. But one of the worries is that people fear challenging them. And the more that so these men can have nothing. They don't have a GRC. They don't have anything. They just want to go into women's spaces or make use of women's services. So if you fear challenging them, then these men are going to be in these spaces, but over time, it will become normalized. And like you said at the beginning, Claire, there'll be no single-sex spaces or services because men will just use them. The reason men don't go into women's toilets is convention. Like a man doesn't go in because, it's convention. But if men start regularly going into women's toilets, they're going to take advantage. And same with showers. So it's convention that the boys don't go in and shower with the girls, or the men don't go and shower with the women. They just don't do it. But if men start doing it, then other men will think, I fancy going and showering with the women.
It's precisely the men that we wouldn't want in these spaces that will abuse this to gain access. And that's what we have to get across to people. The government is using the fact that voter apathy, it's just an issue, isn't it? And then they haven't highlighted this at all, have they? It's not like they've shouted it from the rooftops. They've done everything possible to try and stop any of this coming out. So people, and the half the problem is that when you speak to people, they actually don't believe you. They just think it's nonsense. It's really not, it's happening now, and we I don't know how we're going to manage it, but we have to somehow get through to people that this is actually a thing, and it is actually a problem, a big problem.
Well, I think that's what we have to do. We have to raise awareness of it. In the polling, there was less than half. But we do have a little bit of luck on that. Well, not luck, a little bit of progress in that we are getting into the newspapers a lot more. The council elections are ideal because it's local. And, you can go in the local press and talk about the attack on women's rights. It's coming into spring. It might be time for some more demonstrations.
I think so. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and the other thing we can do is go to the hustings, go to all of the hustings and start asking the people standing, what is a woman? Ask them the question, find out what their views are. Are they going to stand up for women's rights, or are they into men's rights? Start asking these questions.
Actually, I found I've asked a couple of councillors what a woman is, and they have no idea what I'm talking about. So a lot of the councillors don't even know about this issue.
So it'll be time to raise their awareness as well. Let's make sure we let them know about it this election. So any women out there, if you want to protect women and children and want to protect our rights, there's only one strategy for us now, and that is get yourself elected to council. So stand for council, talk about women's rights, talk about the threat to them, talk about the threat to children, and make a difference. I hope you enjoyed this Cauldron show, and we will be back next week to talk about more things that have been happening in the world of women's rights and safeguarding of children. So see you then. Bye.